watching Big Brain Energy.
Why are some things in New Zealand, like alcohol, so expensive? Other places are way cheaper. Well, it's because the government imposes a minimum price control on some things like alcohol. Oh, okay. Well, what is that though? Let me explain. In this video, we will cover what a minimum price control is, how to draw the minimum price control graph. We'll talk about some implications of minimum price control in the real world, and we'll talk about how to word your answers for the NCEA Level 3 External on market equilibrium. And then we'll finish up with some practice questions. If you are taking the NCEA External, check out our playlist where we cover all you need to know to get excellence in this external. Let's get into it. So what is a minimum price control? The minimum price control is when the government imposes a minimum price on something. This means that the price cannot go below a certain amount. Usually, the purpose of a minimum price control is to encourage people to buy less of something. For example, the government might set a minimum price control on alcohol. Let's say they make it $5 per standard drink. This means that it becomes illegal for a producer to sell a standard drink for less than $5. They are allowed to sell it for more, just never less. So a minimum price control is usually used for things to make them more expensive so that people buy less of it, which is why it's used on something like alcohol. Minimum price control can be shown on a graph. To draw a graph, we begin with the regular demand and supply graph, with price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis. We then draw in a horizontal line called the minimum price line, and we label this price P-min for minimum price. This is going to be above the market equilibrium, which is PE. So that means that we're selling this thing for more than it was under the equilibrium price. This is the minimum price that a producer must sell this thing for. With the minimum price, because it's more expensive, people are going to want less. Quantity demanded is where the minimum price intersects the demand curve. This gives us the quantity demanded, the amount that people want to buy. The amount that people want to buy is less than the amount under the market equilibrium, QE. So with the minimum price control, it results in a higher price and a lower quantity. This means that the consumer surplus is going to be less than what it was under the original market. So the consumer surplus is this blue triangle here, which stretches from the amount that the consumer is willing to pay, so the demand curve, to the amount that they actually pay, so P-min. Producer surplus is this orange shape. The price increases from PE to P-min, so producers receive more money for each thing that they sell. But quantity, however, decreases from QE to QD, so they are selling less stuff. So the producer surplus stretches from the price that producers are willing to sell something for, so the supply curve, up to the price that they actually sell it for, so P-min, and it goes out to the quantity that they sell, QD. Then we have the deadweight loss, which is this grey triangle. The deadweight loss represents the surplus that could have been gained, but isn't because of the minimum price. So we could have been buying all the way up to market equilibrium, which would be where producers and consumers agreed on the price to be sold. But we don't do this. We only produce up to QD. So that potential that is lost is deadweight loss. Let's have a look now at the implications of minimum price control in real life. So minimum price control makes something more expensive and therefore people buy less of it. So usually the purpose of a minimum price control is to encourage people to buy less of something. But it also means that producers receive more money for the thing that they're selling. So it can also be used to ensure that a producer can make enough profit to cover its cost. You could also, though, consider this problematic for something like a minimum price on alcohol. It means that, yes, people are buying less, but also the producers of alcohol are benefiting more. The alcohol companies are guaranteed to make a profit because it's really expensive to buy alcohol under the minimum price. Hence, people get super rich off of selling things like this. It is also possible that a black market can emerge. The black market means that something is sold and brought illegally. Basically, if people want to buy cheap alcohol, they might do an under-the-table transaction where they buy alcohol off the record so that they can get it for cheaper. This is called a black market, and it is illegal. In the Level 3 exam, they may ask you about the impact of the minimum price control on consumers, producers, on the government, and on allocative efficiency. You need to know how to explain the impact referring to the graph for each of these. So let's go through an example answer to an excellence level for each of these situations. Firstly, what is the impact on consumers when there is a minimum price control? Consumers are worse off because they need to pay a higher price, which is reflected by the increase from PE to P-min. They decrease the quantity they demand, so quantity demanded decreases from QE to QD. On the graph, the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and actually pay decreases, and that's the definition of consumer surplus. So we're saying that consumer surplus decreases. And there are less units from which to gain a surplus. This means that the quantity being brought is decreasing, therefore there is less opportunity for consumers to benefit from buying something. Overall, consumer surplus decreases. This would be the answer that you can give for an excellence level for both the impact on consumers and the impact on consumer surplus. It's the same answer. That last sentence, when we talk about less units from which to gain a surplus, that's the technical wording that they like you to use in this external for an excellence answer. Let's look now at the impact on producers. Producers are better off because they receive a higher price. Price for them increases from PE to P-min. They also, though, sell a lower quantity. Quantity decreases from QE to QD. However, the increase in price usually outweighs the decrease in quantity. Hence, the producers are better off overall, and producer surplus increases. The difference between what producers are willing to sell and actually sell for increases, so that was the definition of producer surplus. So they're just saying that producer surplus increases, and there are less units from which to gain a surplus. So we're saying that the quantity sold is less, therefore there are less opportunities for the producer to benefit from selling something. Let's look now at the impact on the government. If the government imposes a minimum price control because they wish for the quantity of the good or service consumed to decrease, then they have achieved their objective, as quantity decreases from QE to QD due to the higher price. If the government imposes a minimum price control because they wish the producer to receive more money for their product than the market price, then they have also achieved their objective, as price increases from PE to P-min. And finally, let's look at the impact on allocative efficiency. Before the minimum price is imposed, the market is allocatively efficient because the consumer and producer surpluses are maximised and there is no deadweight loss. When the minimum price is imposed, consumer surplus decreases and producer surplus increases. The increase in producer surplus, though, is not enough to outweigh the decrease in producer surplus, as indicated by the deadweight loss. Hence, when there is a minimum price control, the market is not allocatively efficient, so total surpluses are not maximised and there is a net welfare loss. So before there was a minimum price control, the market was allocatively efficient because we were operating at the market equilibrium, with the producers and consumers benefiting as much as they could be. But when we impose the minimum price control, allocative efficiency lessens because the consumer surpluses decrease overall. There is less opportunity for consumers and producers to benefit because that minimum price has got to result in a lower quantity being brought than the ideal market equilibrium quantity. So the market isn't as efficient as it could be. Great, so here's now a summary of the key things you need to know. When the government imposes a minimum price control, this means that the price cannot go below a certain amount. Usually, the purpose of a minimum price control is to encourage people to buy less of something. And here's the graph with all the information on it. You need to know how to draw the graph, how to draw in the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, and the deadweight loss. You'll also then need to know how to explain the impact on consumers, producers, the government, and allocative efficiency. Let's now do some practice questions to consolidate this learning. Feel free to pause the video if you need more time. What is the minimum price control? Minimum price control is when the government imposes a minimum price, which means that the price cannot go below a certain amount. Illustrate the government imposing a minimum price on the market for cigarettes. Here is the answer. We have a P-min line which is horizontal and it is above the market equilibrium price. It results in a higher price and a lower quantity. Shade and label the producer surplus, consumer surplus, and deadweight loss resulting from a minimum price imposed on the market for cigarettes. Here is the answer. We have consumer surplus, that blue triangle at the top, and producer surplus, the orange shape down the bottom, and then the grey triangle is the deadweight loss. What is the impact on consumers when a minimum price control is imposed on cigarettes? Consumers are worse off when there is a minimum price control on cigarettes because they need to pay a higher price, so the price for them increases from PE to P-min. Hence, they decrease the quantity that they demand. Quantity demanded decreases from QE to QD. The difference between what consumers are willing to pay and actually pay decreases, and there are less units from which to gain a surplus. Hence, consumer surplus decreases. What is the impact on producers when a minimum price control is imposed on cigarettes? Producers are better off when there is a minimum price control on cigarettes because they receive a higher price. Price for them increases from PE to P-min. And they also sell a lower quantity. Quantity decreases for them from QE to QD. However, the increase in price tends to outweigh the decrease in quantity. Hence, producers are better off overall, and producer surplus increases. So the difference between what producers are willing to receive and actually receive increases, and there are less units from which to gain a surplus. Hence, producer surplus increases. What is the impact on the government when a minimum price control is imposed on cigarettes? If the government imposes a minimum price control on cigarettes because they wish the quantity of cigarettes consumed to decrease, then they have achieved their objective because quantity decreases from QE to QD due to the higher price. If the government imposes a minimum price control because they wish the producer to receive more money for their cigarettes than the market price, then they have also achieved their objective because price increases from PE to P-min. What is the impact on allocative efficiency when minimum price control is imposed on cigarettes? Before the minimum price is imposed on cigarettes, the market is allocatively efficient because the consumer and producer surpluses are maximised and there is no deadweight loss. When the minimum price control is imposed, consumer surplus decreases and producer surplus increases. But the increase in producer surplus is not enough to outweigh the decrease in consumer surplus, as indicated by the deadweight loss. Hence, when there is a minimum price control, the market is not allocatively efficient. Total surpluses are not maximised and there is a net welfare loss. Why might a minimum price control imposed on the market of cigarettes be considered problematic? There are a few different answers you could give here. Usually, the purpose of minimum price control is to encourage people to buy less, but it also means that producers receive more profits. You could consider this problematic for something like cigarettes because it means that the cigarette companies are guaranteed to make profit, hence people get super rich off of selling cigarettes. Also, it is possible that a black market could emerge because people seek to buy cigarettes for cheaper. That is everything for this video on minimum price control. We've also uploaded a video on maximum price control, which you can check out. If you have any questions about what we've covered today, drop a comment down below. You can also let us know what you'd like us to cover next. If you would like to support this New Zealand-based economics channel, please hit the subscribe button and the like button. It makes a huge difference to the algorithm. See you next time for more Big Brain Energy.